Craig.
Hi, so how are you?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Okay, we're here. We're safe. We're in Walt's office. Like it's.
Got a beautiful view out the window.
We do.
Can almost
we do.
see the Bighorn
I
Mountains today.
know. I did have to make my way around all the construction to finally make it in here like that one. What exactly are they doing to Walt's office here? What's going on out there?
Well, cross your fingers. We don't think it's actually our problem.
Okay.
But between the museum facility and the historic courthouse,
Okay.
there's a steam boiler that heats the courthouse, and it has been leaking underground
Oh.
for an undetermined amount of time. So, as you might imagine, that's probably causing some issues that
Wow,
yet
this sounds like a Walt Longmire, doesn't it? Like
I
discover.
I had that thought this morning. I was talking with the guys about when the different additions to the museum were built, and building plans and things like that. I'm sure they exist somewhere, but I
Who
don't know
knows where?
where. And I had the thought of, what if they found a body or something? And then
or a tunnel, like running in between the museum and the
some kind of hidden treasure.
Yeah. For those of you who might not know, we're actually sitting in the Jim Gatchell Museum, which is the preeminent museum here in Buffalo, Wyoming, and is actually the model for Walt Longmire's office. Like that, and I just have to do a little bit of this, simply because.
We love it.
And it's the reason being that whenever I first started writing the books, Larry Kirkpatrick, who had been the sheriff in Johnson County, told me that this building had actually been used as a sheriff's office for a brief period of time. It's right behind the courthouse, so it's just exactly the way I have it described in the books. It is the original Carnegie Library, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful building like that. And the fact that it's been able to survive and been saved like that and utilized as such an incredible little museum here in Buffalo like that, and it's just if you ever get the chance, if you ever get the opportunity to come to Buffalo / Durant, Wyoming, like the Jim Gatchell is an absolute must. You must stop in here.
Well, thank you for the plug. We appreciate it, and
my pleasure.
We love our building, even when we're dealing with maintenance nightmares. But, at the back end, so this is north, that's south.
Right.
And at the south end, before the carriage house was built in the 90s, I guess that was the location of the jail. Too.
Okay.
So, I mean, you never know what kind of artifacts they might find back there. There's a possibility.
Well, that was the thing for me was that I have to admit that the biggest reasoning was, first of all, it was location, because I thought, okay, it's going to be, that would put the sheriff's office right there almost on Main Street and right behind the courthouse. And so anything that have happened in the books or anything, it's right there. He doesn't have to get in the truck and drive,
Walking distance to the busy beach.
Exactly, even more important for goodness sake. And
my life revolves around
the busy me too. Yeah. But there's that, and then it was the aesthetic. Because I mean, we have a really spectacular law enforcement center, up here on 4th Street, which is the Buffalo Police Department and the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. It's all state of the art. I mean, it's very brand new, beautiful building, everything like that. But it just didn't quite have the aesthetic that I wanted for this old school sheriff. And so that's why your lovely museum became Walt Longmire's office.
Well, we think it's super cool. The only thing that is a bummer is you can't really work the museum into a book.
I know.
As the office, and okay, I probably shouldn't admit this in a public venue, but that literally just dawned on me about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought it through prior to that.
There's that. There's the fact that Johnson County can't ever get mentioned in the books. The fact that Buffalo itself, can't ever get mentioned in the books. I mean, every other town in Wyoming, that I've got, it gets a little appearance here and there like that. But poor Buffalo and poor KC.
Well, maybe Jim Gatchell can make an appearance.
You never know.
He's a really cool personality.
There's no reason why I can't use another building to put the Jim Gatchell in like that. So.
Or just bring Jim back to life. He was a cool guy. He was a pharmacist, historian, collector. He had 3 daughters. He had to have been a patient man. I swear I read one time, and I can't remember where now, but that he might have had a beer garden in his backyard.
Wow.
Because I thought that was pretty fun.
Absolutely.
He apparently had this little paint pony that he gave all the grandkids rides on.
Wow.
I mean, he was a character, and I bet you could have fun with him.
Johnson County has an ability to foster that kind of characterism. Like, it's kind of interesting. You can go about and throw a rock in any direction, and you will hit a character. Like that's just it's handy for me, like that, because whenever I'm like doing the research for the books and everything, that's it's very easy like that to come up with all kinds of wild ideas. And it's interesting too, like that, because generally those are the ones that people will call me on. They'll say, oh, well, there's no way that blah, blah, blah could have possibly been blah, blah, blah and blah, blah, blah book. And I'm like, yeah, actually they were. Actually, if you want to know the truth, they actually did exist. And here's their real name if you want to go look them up, look and find out about them.
Small towns sometimes have some of the most intriguing histories.
They do.
Lake DeSmet to our north, back in the day, there was a showboat for a day, and then it apparently caught fire and sank on its maiden voyage.
To the water line.
You can't make that up.
No.
And that was built by locals.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
there's a plethora of
material to work with.
For sure. So how has this last year been? How did things go for you? You have a book release every September.
Right.
I'm sure you stay busy regardless.
I do. Look, it's the stock and trade. Of what it is that I do. I joke about it and say, I sit in a room and type about my imaginary friends for a living. Is basically what I do. Like that, and it's actually it's a wonderful way for a guy that would, as a child, used to get yelled at a lot for looking out windows and not paying attention during school. Like that, the teachers would always say, just wait, you're never going to amount to much looking out windows and thinking stories up. And I'm like, yeah, you know what, it kind of turned out pretty well, actually. I guess.
You ever dropped a note?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to take anything away from. But actually, the truth to be told, an awful lot of the teachers that I have are gone, so I'm not going to have to worry about like insulting anybody or anything. But that was That was a part of the year that that didn't change because I do that. But then we do have touring, and then even some world touring. Like the books have been translated and everything, and so that got shut down.
Quite a few languages.
Yeah. We just went into Russian, I think. And so we're over 20 languages now with the Walt Longmire series. But it's it's one of those things where obviously somebody heading out. It's kind of a tough situation because no travel, no touring. Last year's tour was completely virtual,
right?
And so it looked like that was going to be the case again this year, like that. But then they opened it up a little bit, and so now I've got like about a week and a half or 2 week tour, I think, that's coming up in September. And the same thing goes with Longmire Days. It was we were looking at probably it's going to be all virtual, like as we're doing now, like that. But we are going to have a few live events like that, but we're going to be very careful about it. Just because we don't want to put any more of a burden on the municipality of Buffalo's hospitals or EMS or anything or anybody like in any way.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want somebody's fun experience to turn into something that's
something that's very, very bad.
Awful.
That would be horrible. Like that.
That's not the memory you want people to
No,
go with.
no, not at all. That's certainly not the spirit of Walt Longmire, who is kind of enforces the laws like that, and so we want to try and steer clear of any kind of doing any damage to anybody under any way.
I think that's healthy, and I absolutely respect that.
No, well, thank you.
For sure.
Writing wise, I'm actually probably next week, just before Longmire Days, I will finish the second draft of the book that's not due until January. Dang. So staying at home does have some good qualities to it. When you're not out flaunting up and down the road like that, then it gives you more time to actually write like that. And so that's been kind of handy like that. But that'll give me some extra. I've got some other projects that I'm working on too like that, and so that'll give me a couple months to work on those.
See, that's dedication. I think I would procrastinate and I'd still leave it to the very last. When I was in college, I was that student that.
You were the Sunday night girl, huh?
11:50 would be like my time. 11:50 to at midnight. So hats off to you for sure.
That scares me too much, like that, because. But that's also the thing. I mean, if I hope, if you write good books, the big thing is it's never done. Yeah. And so. You're rewriting all the way up until they finally tell you hey, we need the book, and to me that's kind of essential to the whole process, because you never finish like it just has a deadline. You have to turn it in. It's simple as that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So from what I've been reading in the teasers that come out on Facebook and other places, it sounds like your next title is really going to focus on the missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yes.
And that's a pretty heavy topic, and I know, having read all of your other books, you're going to handle it quite well.
Well, thank you.
But I'm kind of happy to see that, and I feel like as a famous person, you have kind of a platform to use to bring awareness to this, which I think is also pretty cool, and I'd like to know what you think about that.
Well, it's a situation that's like horrifying. How it all started, like it was, is I was actually, how I became aware was a number of years back. Like I went up to Hardin and was doing a library event in Hardin, and there on the bulletin board in the library there were a couple of like missing persons, homemade missing persons, posters that people had made, on a copying machine or whatever. And these young women that were missing, and I thought, my gosh,
Hardin is a tiny community. Right?
It is, how could this possibly be? And so then I started doing a little bit of research on it. Of course, discovered that there are more than 5,000 missing women per year in Indian country, and it just was horrifying to me, like that. And so I started doing a little bit more research on that, and I thought, okay, this is definitely something that Walt would have to contend with at some point in time. Like that. And even though it's not his jurisdiction, with him being down here in Wyoming, like that, he's close enough to the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow Reservation, that it would, like that. And so it was a social issue that I thought very strongly I wanted to take a look at. But then the difficulty becomes, it's a novel, and so it's not nonfiction, so it's not like you can go off on this diatribe of social issues and try and deal with them and all of this. Like you have to try and find some way to have an access point, to the social issue. And I remembered, having been up there numerous times with my good friend Marcus Red Thunder, and he had boys, that were involved with the athletic, communities there in Lame Deer, like that, and then daughters also. And so I remember sitting in a girls' basketball game in Lame Deer, and I can't remember if it was Hardin they were playing, or maybe I think it was Lodge Grass they were playing. And it was a war, is what it was. It was like a war going on. And I remember watching these incredible young women playing basketball. And basketball is huge, on the reservation. Like that, it's a really, it's a res sport. Just simply because you can get 1-on-1, you can get a 3-on-3. You can get a team up and going like with 5 people like that. And so it's not quite as technologically or equipment oriented as like say football or basketball, or baseball, or a lot of other things like that. And so it was interesting to see just how important that was to the social fabric on the res. And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, if you had a young woman who was an amazing athlete, obviously destined for college ball and maybe even professional, how would that play out? What would happen to it? So I started doing the research on that and discovered that an awful lot of times like that there are a lot of native athletes who are not given the scholastic abilities that a lot of other players are, simply because the ideas of scholarships is that they won't stick it out. They won't stay, and do the full 4 years away, because it's very, very difficult, I think, for an awful lot of native athletes and native young people like that to go away from a place where they were born, that they grew up, that their families are all there and all of that. And so there's a certain amount of rebound there. And so it was interesting to me to start thinking about this young woman and where would she go and what would happen to her if she started receiving all these death threats, which is what happens in the book. It's very racist kind of remarks like that were made towards her, and a very difficult kind of situation. And so Lolo Long, the police chief, for the Northern Cheyenne tribe, like that, calls up Walt and Henry and says, "I need some help. This is turning into a situation I think that we need to try to do something about." And of course, the real difficulty of this is that a year previous, this young woman had a sister who went missing and just disappeared. And I started thinking about it, and the people that I've known who have like survived this type of thing, it's maybe the worst thing in the world, just simply because you never know.
Right.
You don't know what happened to them or where they went. And I can't even imagine, having somebody I care about a family member or just a friend or the daughter of a friend or whatever who would just go completely missing, and you'd never know
what became of them.
That's almost worse than knowing.
Right. Well, I think it's maybe telling of our society that this is just kind of recently come into some of the national spotlight, because it's been ongoing heartbreak for people for years and years. And when you speak to family members and people that have had loss like this, they're going, we've been dealing with this for generations.
Well, no, you
and
look
the rest
back
of the world is kind of oblivious.
Oh yeah, I get, and you look, right now, like what's going on, and certainly not just in Canada, but certainly with the episodes that we've seen kind of unfold, at the boarding schools in Canada, where you have these like grave sites where I don't know how many, it's like 5,000 students or children that they found.
And think about it just for a second. There should never be children's grave sites at a school. Period. How that's
how did that happen, and what is it that it's kind of horrifying. And it kind of combines. This book actually combines into the next book, which deals actually with that issue. And so we'll see what happens as far as that's concerned. But these are obviously a lot of times it puts a black eye on a lot of institutions, and a lot of politicizing and all of this like that. And so to have it come to light, and to see just how grave, no pun intended, that the situation is kind of essential.
Oh, absolutely, I would agree. And I feel like I'm a history nerd, I'm not a historian, but from what I have read on a plethora of subjects, there's always a key element, and that is acknowledgement. Recognizance of an event, of an effort, whatever it may be, just that acknowledgement that this happened. And that is, it's pivotal. So I feel like maybe that's kind of happening in some of these realms. So I'm trying to kind of follow along with the news, and I'm curious, do you have any, I understand what you're saying, it's a fictional book, but do you have any encouragement for your fans of if they're reading this and they think, oh my gosh, how can I help?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I know there's some task force between Montana and Wyoming, and
there's
organizations.
There's the resource center that's in Lame Deer itself, which is actually the national charity recipient of Longmire Days this year.
I was wondering if
that's going to be, and then of course the local one is the Johnson County Search and Rescue, which I tease and make fun of in the book. So I felt like I owed them.
They perform pretty key services.
They do a marvelous job. But it doesn't keep me from teasing everybody.
That's okay.
But yeah, the resource center up in Lame Deer is actually our national charity this year, and also in the acknowledgments in the books. In this particular book, I've actually got the website and all the information to be able to make donations to this cataclysmic event. There's a line, I think it's Lonnie Littlebird, who's the chief of the Northern Cheyenne tribe, who's kind of based off of a good friend of mine, Charles Whiteman, who passed away here in the last year. And there's an old quote and I think it's Cheyenne that you've never defeated a people until their women's hearts are on the ground. And then Lonnie makes that statement, and then he says, but what if there are no women at all? How can you have a society, a culture, or a tribe, a civilization at all? And so it's very near and dear to my heart, this particular situation, with a wife and 2 daughters and a granddaughter, it's kind of close to home, and so it's very important to me, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with some of those issues. I think we're going to have a representative from the organization actually during Longmire Days, and most certainly hopefully next year because this is a kind of a continuation that'll continue on with the next book too. So
awesome. Well, that's some tough topics to work into. Like I said, I know you'll handle it really well because you managed to take tough topics and merge humor and history and
you're too kind.
Some literature in there. So it's always fun, and I love to try and follow along with how that all gets intertwined. And thinking about that too, the last title, Next to the Last Stand, there were still murders and there was some tough subjects in there, but it was also kind of centered on art theft, and there were a lot of really funny situations. So again, I can see the kind of continuation between the titles, but also pretty vastly different.
Yeah, it's that's kind of the I think the challenge, I think, of when whenever you write a series of books like that, the one thing you don't want to do is like turn into a widget factory. You don't want to be stamping out the same formula books every time like that. And so I've been extraordinarily fortunate like that I kind of stumbled onto an ensemble of characters and a lead guy who allow me a lot of leeway, to do a lot of different things. I mean, I'll come up with an idea, for a book, a different book, a standalone book or something like that. And then after it mulls around in my head for a couple of months, I'm like, that could be that's a Walt Longmire. I could easily do that as a Walt Longmire. And it ends up being a Walt Longmire book. Like, and this one, of course, with the last year's book, Next to Last Stand, with Walt being involved with an art heist, and it being, such a penultimate, piece of artwork. I remember, when I first started doing the research with you guys and the Buffalo Bill and everybody like that, and the Bradford Brinton, discovering, like, I remember, that when I was talking to the Buffalo Bill folks, like that, they said, I said, well, if that painting was to be found, what would it be worth? And they said, oh, 24, 25. And I was like, $1,000? And they were like, $1 million. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, well, that's kind of where Walt would be, that would be like, because he's not an art expert in any way. Like, he loves art, he knows art, like that, but, he's certainly no expert. And then to start off, like, and it kind of like catapults you, into the history, of course, the Little Bighorn, which was a good point of contention between Walt and Henry as to what the white perspective is of the Little Bighorn, and then of course what the native perspective of the Little Bighorn was like. And so that was just a fun thing to do. And this one it's a serious situation like that, but I think I would really have a hard time writing a book that didn't have an element of comedy in it, just simply because it's such an important part of our day-to-day lives.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, we're hearing this with the COVID thing and with the quarantines and all this stuff. You got to keep your sense of humor. If you don't, if you get too serious about this kind of stuff, you're going down a dark road.
And you're not fun to be around.
Yeah, and who wants to spend time with you, for goodness sake? Okay, and so for me, of course, the big element here is that here's poor Walt, on a busload of teenage girls. Well, he hasn't dealt with teenage girls, since his daughter, who was an assistant district attorney for the state of Wyoming, was a teenage girl. Like, now he's got a granddaughter coming up who's heading into that period in time. Like, and and having two daughters and having a granddaughter who's just now 14. Like, and I'm starting to see, some of those changes that that take place. Like, and some of the difficulties, that an older man might have. In coming to terms, with
like foreign worlds colliding.
It kind of is.
I remember being a teenager. So I get that.
And I do too. Like, and I just think it's that's where an awful lot of the humor, kind of tends to come from. The other thing is like with Jaya Long, she's a phenomenal, athlete. I mean, she's really, really good. But she has some problems. She doesn't have a lot of respect for her fellow players. She's not much of a team player. She's a star and she knows it. And so it's kind of interesting to see this go on between Walt and her like that, because Walt was an offensive lineman for USC. He played in a national championship. He's got a little bit of experience. He's cut his teeth a little bit as an athlete back in the day. Of course, that was quite a ways back. And so, even the game of basketball, he doesn't really recognize an awful lot of it anymore. It's changed so much like that. And so there's a lot of humor involved with that. And then also, Walt is, once again, kind of a stranger in a strange land. Obviously Lolo Long is the tribal police chief. She has a lot of authority, there in Lame Deer and up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Henry, I think, the way Walt describes traveling with Henry in the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is kind of like in the company of royalty, but sometimes it's the Prince of Darkness. Like, and so, his, attitudes, like, and his, dealings, up on the res are a little bit different from Lolo's.
His authority is from a different place.
From a different perspective, yes. Like,
Yeah.
And so that's been kind of fun, like, to utilize too, because, there's a lot. I think there's actually during one of the ball games, Walt's trying to get this guy to tell him, what happened, when this young woman disappeared, and Slola's, Jaya's sister Jeannie, when she disappeared, when this car broke down, he's trying to get this guy to tell him the story, and the guy's not going to tell him the story. He's like, I don't have to answer to you, you're a sheriff in Wyoming, I don't have to tell you anything. And Walt looks down and points out Henry sitting in the front row and says, do you see that great big guy with a leather jacket down there like that, and he looks and he goes, yeah. And he goes, Standing Bear, and he goes, yeah, he would really like for you to answer my questions. And Walt, and he's like, he says, I'm not going to answer your questions. Like, he don't scare me none. And Walt's like, well, I'm glad to hear that because he scares the hell out of me. And Walt starts to get up and he's like, wait a minute. And so, he does come through and answer the questions like it. And so Henry's kind of the enforcer, in this book, to get people to, to answer the questions like it, and kind of get the investigation kind of rolling.
Well, I think that's very human. You can't put people into tiny little boxes. We're not one-dimensional.
Yeah.
So, that definitely adds, for me, to that authentic feeling of these could be real people. Your imaginary friends.
Well, and it's a different
people.
world. It's a different world.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go up there, it's a different world. It's a sovereign nation unto itself. It has its own language. It has its own courts, its own police force. It's like going to a different country. And that for me is kind of exciting, because you're always looking for ways to make things a little bit different in each book.
Right.
So and this one definitely is, another breed of cat.
That works. So we were talking about this a little bit before we got started, but what's your most recent read? What are you reading?
Oh, I was very fortunate here. I did an event with a good friend of mine who's an author over in Oregon, and I was able to get David Heska Wambley-Whedon, who wrote a wonderful book called Winter Counts, and he was on there, and he's up for a number of awards. And he's a marvelous individual.
He's from South Dakota.
He is from South Dakota.
So
he's native. And so what the exciting thing for me is that there's been a lot of native writing done in the mystery genre over the years. Probably starting with Tony Hillerman, I think, who kind of started it out in 1968. He doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, that he deserves because people kind of forget that was the AIM years. That was the Occupy Alcatraz years. That 68, that was a big year of unrest, and there was a lot of anti-Indian sentiment, at that point in time, anti-Native sentiment. And so for him to start a series of books about two Native police officers, investigators, on the Navajo reservation, that was kind of gutsy, and it turned out really, really well, of course, because, Tony's a marvelous writer, and his daughter, Anne, has now taken over the mantle and is continuing on, and did a marvelous job because she took basically a minor character in her dad's books and made her the main character in her books, and his two major characters are kind of the background characters in hers, and did a marvelous job and I'm going to get to do another event with her before too long But to go back to David's book, Winter Counts, it's actually about an enforcer from up on the reservation in South Dakota who goes on a job, kind of an enforcement job down in Denver, and gets involved in this case.
Teenage nephew's pretty heavily up
in
it.
Yeah, and it's not only is it incredible to have it from the perspective. And he's an instructor down in Denver. He's a lawyer down in Denver. We try not to hold that against him. He's a lawyer. I can say that because I have lawyers in the family too. But anyway, he's also, the big thing is he's a marvelous writer, and it's a fantastic book. And I guess it's the beginning of a new series, and so that's the most recent one.
That's cool to hear. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Couple of pages in, I was definitely feeling it right here. I'm a chicken. I don't deal with
it's a little gut-wrenching
and some of the, and I've been a very fortunate and privileged person that I haven't had to deal with a lot of these tough topics. So I absolutely became invested in the narrator's world.
Oh, the voice and everything.
His family and his on-again, off-again girlfriend.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's a definite thing that gets you hooked is when you start feeling for characters.
Oh yeah. And he definitely sets the hook on you very early on like that, and it's genuine. You know that it's genuine. The feel that you get. He doesn't try and gloss things over. He doesn't try and sugarcoat anything. But then again, he also doesn't vilify the society and the culture, like that, and the situation that the characters find themselves in, like that. And so it's a very unvarnished, very honest, I think, portrayal of a certain level of, reservation life.
I mean, we have to remember again that humans aren't one-faceted. There's always more to the story. And Johnson County, the Cattle War is one of our biggest stories in history, and it's far too easy to say these were the good guys and these were the bad guys and this is how it ended. That is just not encompassing. You can't do that.
No.
And people on both sides of that conflict did bad things and good things, and you have to remember that. So I think that it's...
Well, that's nice too, like, because it seems like, with, and I'm sorry, I'll have to blame that a lot, on the entertainment industry. It's a lot easier, whether it be, movies, television, books, whatever, it's a lot easier if you can just put a black hat or a white hat on one of the characters and then, make it a little bit more streamlined. But yeah, generally, the history is a little more complex than that. And then, fortunately, we've hit a point in time like that where, people are willing to accept that, and understand that there, might be some good points to the bad characters, and there might be some bad some bad points to the good characters too.
That was a lesson I learned kind of hard, I think, for me as a, probably 11-year-old kid. I've always loved reading, and I knew the staff at the Sheridan Library at that time quite well, and Cary Grant has been one of my favorite actors since I was a kid, and I read a biography about him, and he didn't do anything that bad, but I remember feeling disappointed, and I thought, I'm never going to read another biography again. I matured a few years and thought, well, that's stupid. We all do things that people might not like. But it was a lesson that stuck with me that you can't idolize somebody, for starters. That's dumb. That's an 11-year-old,
Right.
And then when you learn about them, you have to understand that just like I've done dumb things in my past.
They are a human being. They are a carbon-based life form. For better or worse. And the best quote about that was there was a good friend of ours, like it was a big producer in Los Angeles, and it was an executive for a number of different studios, big name. And we came in one time like that, and we'd been out for a drive in one of his cars, and we came in, and there was a guy leaving a message on his phone machine, and it was Sean Connery leaving a message on his phone machine. And he said, he was telling, he said, well, I'm going to be in Los Angeles next week. You must let me take you out to dinner. I'm not going to embarrass you by doing my bad Sean Connery imitation. And he said, Ned, you got to let me take you out to dinner next week. Just to thank you, for all the work that you've done for me over the years and all this. And so he finishes up talking like that, and I watch Ned reaches down and hits the erase button. And I'm looking at him, and I looked at him and I go, did you just erase a message from James Bond? He laughed at me and he goes, yes, I did. And I said, aren't you going to go have dinner with him? Aren't you going to go have lunch with him? And he looks up and he goes, Craig, I grew up watching that man act. I grew up watching those movies, and I love him to death. And the best advice I can give you is leave him on the screen.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. Thank goodness our actors are not like that. They're pretty wonderful. Look at for Longmire days, and we're always happy to have them here.
Yeah, for sure. That's not something that I would think about because I don't deal with celebrities and actors.
I know. They're human beings, just like everybody else.
True enough. So thinking about time, and you mentioned earlier you've kind of got more advanced work done on your next novel than you might have otherwise. What kind of time goes into a book? I mean, you're also a multifaceted person, and you have property and horses and family and everything else. So.
Yeah, but the priority has to be those books. Whenever Judy's yelling at me to fix something at the ranch or do something on the house or something, I'm like, when I disappear up into that loft, that's where the checks come from. Just so you know. So when we're paying our bills, it's kind of important that I go up there and do those things. But yeah, no, it varies, from book to book. I mean, that's the big thing. There's some books that are obviously, excuse me, are a little bit more research oriented. There are ones that the one from last year, I knew that if I was going to do a book that was going to have to do with the Little Bighorn battle, I better know everything there was to know. I mean, you're a museum curator. You know this better than I do. Look at it. If you're going to put a show up or something, you better have all of your T's crossed, your I's dotted.
Fastest way to learn a mistake is put it out there.
Put it out. They'll tell you. They'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
And so that has a lot to do with it. An awful lot of the time, it becomes a question of how much research is there involved, with the book itself. This one, the one that's coming out, Daughter of the Morning Star. It had more to do with social history. It had more to do, with immediate history, like what's going on in society and in the culture right now as far as those missing women and murdered women are concerned. So that really wasn't as, labor intensive as going back and being knowledgeable, about a historic event or something along those lines. Also, the period pieces, like the ones that, take place in a different time period. Western Star, half that book took place in the 70s, and so I had to, go back and, and make sure that I got that right. Was this a phrase or a turn of phrase that was used in the 1970s?
Language is big. It changes so frequently.
Oh, yeah. And, and then, of course, Another Man's Moccasins took place, during Vietnam, about half the book. And, it's not like I'm talking about the Crimean War here. There are people walking around now who are very familiar with Vietnam. They were there. And so, it's, kind of essential, I think, and respectful, to make sure, that you get it and that you get it right. It was interesting like that because one of the things that David Whedon had said when I was doing the event with him, the writer of Winter Counts, when I was doing the event with him for Powell's, it was a little bit of the same thing because somebody asked him in the question section, how do you feel about non-natives writing from a native perspective like that? And his his statement was, it doesn't bother me at all as long as it's done well and done respectfully. That's what it's always going to come down to. If if you're just out there making stuff up, or ridiculing, an entire society or a culture, you got a problem.
And you don't deserve a following for
that
either.
And so, I think that's, one of the key elements there is that, even with this most recent book, probably the most difficult part about it was making sure I got the native aspects, got them right. But then, nonetheless, it takes every bit of a good 6 months to write the first draft of a book. And then it's just a question of going back over it again and again and again and again. And my favorite quote about that is that a book is never really done. You just have a deadline, where you have to turn the book in. Thank goodness, because if that wasn't the case, I'd still be rewriting The Cold Dish, the very first Walt Longmire novel. And so thank goodness, somebody gave me a deadline and said, okay, that's it. You got to hand it over. Okay, so.
See how that's beneficial for sure. So, do you journal or anything to keep track of your ideas? Because, we've talked about this before, but each book is its own kind of complete story, but you also have these sort of long games playing throughout the titles and, keeping track of that, or when you have an idea about them. I'm picturing you scribbling stuff down on your bedside table.
I do. And I'll remember things. The other thing I do, to kind of, rather than having a big bulletin board in my writing loft or something like that, or a notepad or anything generally what I do is I listen to the audiobooks. I'm fortunate enough to have George Guidell, who does an absolutely magnificent job on the books, and he what I do is if I have a trip or something like that and I know there's going to be a book that's going to harken back with the book that I just finished the one that's coming out, Daughter of the Morning Star, I knew it was going to kind of go back to the other Res book that I had done, which was As the Crow Flies. And I thought I need to bring some of those characters back, and pull them out. And so I, had a trip that I had to go down to Salt Lake City and back. That's 8 hours, and then 8 hours back. So that's 16 hours. I can put George Guidell in, and listen to that book all the way down and all the way back. So then it's fresh, in your mind, and you can make those connections a lot easier. The other thing is I spend 8 hours a day at least, with those characters. And so, they're like family.
Yeah.
I know them, extraordinarily well. Ask me when my granddaughter's birthday is, I know when that is. And so, those kind of details, kind of stick with you, when you're spending that much time, with those characters. So I don't have to worry about it too much. Ask me when I get to book 23 and I'm a little bit older. Then it might be more of a problem like that. And so.
Well, I look forward to asking you about the 23.
Me too.
So, what kind of questions, or what's like one of the questions you hear most often from your fans when you're at these different events? What do you hear a lot?
Oh, what are, let's see.
What do people want to know?
It's a lot of times like, because you have like two different crowds that show up. Like you've got the book people, that show up. Like, and then you also have the TV people that show up. Like,
I have earrings I should have worn today. They say the book is always better. I forgot those at home because that's me. That's for sure.
Well, it's hard, it's very, very difficult, I think, for a television show or for a movie to compete, with a 350, 400 page.
It's just a different media. You can't get into the minds of all these different
and so much of it is so inherent, to the way that you view it. Whereas with Hollywood, they have to commit. They have to cast people. They have to, put the costumes on them, pick out a set. Dress the set. Have locations, all these things, and then adapt. The material, if that's what they're doing, adapt it. And so a lot of the questions I get are questions about the television show, about whether, and it can be on both sides of the aisle. It can be the ones who have read the books, and have bear umbrage with something that the TV people did, or the casting, or things like that. It's really kind of funny because the strange things that people get hooked up on, hung up on, like that one is I always get asked, why does Vic have blonde hair?
Yeah.
In the TV show, and I'm like, well, there's a reason for that later on, like that, and then or things like why isn't Henry bigger? And it's like, Lou Diamond Phillips is like over 6 feet tall. He's a pretty good sized guy by Hollywood standards. He's a big guy.
Right.
The problem is that Robert Taylor is a moose. He's like 6'4", and so then you put him in a pair of cowboy boots. He's actually approaching Walt Longmire's size, like that, because in the books, Walt is an offensive lineman for USC. He was a Marine investigator. He's like 6'5" and weighs about 255. 250 pounds, and so he's a big guy. And the reasoning behind that, of course, is that an awful lot of Wyoming sheriffs, tend to be big guys, because we have counties here in the state that are as big as Maryland, and they have staffs that are kind of small, to kind of think about policing an area that big. So an awful lot of the times, whenever a Wyoming sheriff responds to a call, even a deputy, whenever they respond to a call, they're kind of on their own.
Yeah.
And I've seen the effect that like a 6'5" or 6'6" individual has when they walk into an antagonistic situation. The smaller animals kind of calm down a little bit, whenever the big animal walks in the room. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why it was. I wanted him to be capable. I didn't want him to be a 5th degree Dan black belt Navy SEAL, kind of character. I just wanted him to be one of those guys that if he had to, he could grab somebody and put him up against the wall and say, "You need to calm down."
Walt has always made me think of a gentleman who used to work here at the museum, and he was also a sheriff's deputy in Johnson County, and he was also a principal and a teacher. Jim Now, I don't know if you ever met Jim, but big guy, booming voice, the kindest person you'll ever meet. He passed away a couple years ago, which is all of our loss. But I could picture a character like Jim, because he once wanted what was right.
Yeah.
But I could absolutely see him picking somebody up with his massive hands and holding them against the wall and saying, "Calm down."
Yeah. Let's move along.
Yeah.
That's kind of nice. And that's and then there are other things. There are always a lot of questions about the last book, things that they want cleared up, or questions that they've got, people want to know if I actually did find a piece, of the painting, and I was like, I wouldn't be around here touring with books if I had. Actually, I would. I love touring with the books, and I love writing.
But maybe there'd be a new art wing.
Exactly. I would have bought a brand new wing for the Jim Gatchell is what I would have done.
Someday.
Absolutely.
I kind of love that aspect of that particular book, because I feel like in the history world, there's always these like holy grails. Fort Flaherty to our north, a couple of miles, there was a photographer present, Ridgway Glover, and he took all of these images, which would have been some of the very first images, not only of that post, but of native versus military battles in the West. They would be groundbreaking but he was murdered, he was killed because he didn't respect his opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened to his glass plate negatives is this giant question mark. And, you know, everybody always kind of froths at the mouth and, you know, like, what if they're in somebody's attic, or what if, you know, if somebody finds them someday and they realize what they are, it would just be this amazing moment.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the monetary value in them. So there's always stories like this.
Oh gosh.
That
The West is
little-
full of those.
Little possibility.
Yeah. It's always a possibility. Like, and for me, it's always like, then that's an inkling to kick off a book.
Well,
I'm always thinking so.
Ridgway Glover.
Okay.
Man.
Okay. Yeah. I've got it in here now.
So, let's see. We've talked a little bit about this building in the sheriff's office, but I thought it might be fun for you to kind of learn a little bit too. You know, as people come through the museum, obviously more often during Longmire days, but throughout the year, people are fans, whether it's the books or the TV show, and they know when they're here in Buffalo and they understand the settings and they find it really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And they maybe go ask for the usual, the Busy Bee, or
We've
whatever
got a
it is.
Rainier down to the
Yeah.
Occidental.
Yeah. So certainly that has affected our community in a very positive way. And with this particular office being the only real office in the library building, everybody always kind of assumes, okay, well, this was Walt's office space. And sometimes my mind is blown. Folks remember these little details from the books. And I was sitting at my desk one day, and people will pop in sometimes, and they'll be like, oh, I wanted just to see Walt's office. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't look
Exactly like Walt's office.
I mean, I have a computer, for starters, and I use it. But the best experience ever, this gentleman came in, he walks into my office, and I looked up and I made eye contact with him, and it was pretty close to Longmire days, about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And I greeted him, thought maybe he was lost, and I asked if I could help him, and he just looked at me, and he kind of looked up here at this picture of my husband with my horse. It focuses on my horse, but and he says, mm-hmm, and then he just turned around and he left. And I thought, well, okay, what was that? And he commented, well, she didn't look like Walt. Nope. So it has definitely added some extra spice to our lives here too. And
well, the first thing you can tell him is like, well, I've got a doorknob, see, and Walt doesn't have a doorknob, so.
I forgot about that until I was reading one of the teasers recently.
Right, where Barrett's like, do you know your doorknob's missing? Like, so.
It doesn't Walt say something like, I like it.
I like it like that. I'm a man of the people. I like to be accessible. Like, so.
Well, there is no lock on the door. So maybe
So they can wander in
they
anytime.
can wander in.
So.
That also brings me to something, and I'm just gonna scoot right behind you. So a theme throughout all of your books that people I think really love is Ruby and her post-it notes. And at the museum we've had this temporary exhibit, thanks to you and Judy, allowing us to display a lot of items. It's been a lot of fun to have. It's been a lot of fun also to see visitors learn more, not only about you as the author, but how kind of goes from books to a TV show and a crossover, and it's been a really enjoyable experience.
Oh, thank you.
We're sad that it's going to come down soon, but we also understand you guys probably want your stuff back. You can't keep it forever. Part of that exhibit, Kelsey, who works here, she's a phenomenal artist, and she had painted a door.
The door, yes.
And people could leave post-it notes. And she compiled all of them for you.
Oh.
So there's about
oh my goodness.
650 post-it notes in there. So here's some kind of light reading for you.
Oh, well, thank
Check this
you.
out, check out.
Oh, this is marvelous.
There's some pretty funny comments in there. There's some pretty poignant and heartfelt. So it's, that was also enjoyable for us staff. We'd go through and we'd have to clear off the post-it notes because the door would get covered. So Kelsey started compiling these in this.
There's some artwork too.
It is.
So,
We did maybe pull a couple that weren't quite appropriate. Because when you give people pen and paper,
yeah.
you're taking a risk. So we policed it.
Oh, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
We thought it was so generous that you and Judy, provided for the museum to have this exhibit and display, and it certainly brought in people that maybe wouldn't have otherwise thought to visit the museum.
No.
So we benefited of that greatly, and I thought this is, a cool way to share that kind of back with
My
you guys.
pleasure. Thank you so much. I can't wait to work my way through. And tell Luann.
Yes.
She'll be very excited to see this. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.